We'll be taking a break after this episode and through the holidays, and we'll be back again in January with season 5. But we're going out with a great show. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest for today. It's Dr. Delphine Farmer. She's an associate professor at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Colorado State University
Colorado State
in
University.
Fort
Why did I
Collins.
say?
You gave
Why
me
did I
my
do that?
absolute rival.
I just did, didn't I?
Yeah,
Why did
you
I? Why did
did.
that come out
You
of my head?
did. I
I
don't
have it right in
know.
the graphic for what it's worth. Why did I say Boulder? Anyway, thanks for jumping in and correcting the fact that I'm an idiot. See, it actually says it. Associate Professor, Colorado State University. Okay. I don't have my teleprompter, and I'm gonna stick with that again. That's been my excuse several times. Anyway, Delphine, we had the opportunity to. She was on one of our first live broadcasts with the Healthy Indoor Show. Back in March, when this pandemic hit, we started broadcasting live and doing live sessions as opposed to just recorded sessions. So she was on that first marathon that we did, like the 4-hour show. And also we had the opportunity to work together several weeks back at the IAQ and Energy Conference. So this is great. So this is just going to be a continuation of that and me bubbling through introductions.
Always happy to correct you, Bob. Always
Thanks. Well,
happy. No problem.
somebody needs to, because otherwise, it's like I'll be fake news.
Yeah.
I'm going to go all over everything today. So anyway, Delphine, for those of you who don't know, she has been a researcher for many years, but she's been involved with a lot of great things. But more recently, 2 years ago, the HomeChem project it was at the University of Texas in Austin.
Yes.
And I had the opportunity to visit down there. That's when we first met. So tell us about what HomeChem was and why we should be concerned about it.
Absolutely. So HomeChem, well, the name says it all, but we have an acronym. It's House Observations of Microbial and Environmental Chemistry. So what we wanted to do was actually understand what the chemistry that's happening inside an everyday home, and what happens when you do everyday activities. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me how little we understand about somewhere that we spend so much of our time in, especially now with COVID. We're all spending vast amounts of time at home. But even before that, we know we spend 90% of our time indoors. And yet, most of the research that we do in terms of understanding air quality, air pollution, and just how that impacts human health is spent on outdoor air. And that's really important. And one thing we learned from HomeChem is just how much outdoor air impacts indoor air. It's a lot. But the indoor environment's really different. And so what we wanted to do with HomeChem was to actually investigate that chemistry. So we brought in researchers from about 12, 15 different institutions around the US and Canada, brought them all to Austin, Texas. We had many amazing graduate students and postdocs and researchers all converge on this tiny little test house. And then we would do everyday activities, mopping, cooking, cleaning the house, just sitting there working on a laptop. And then we had all these different instruments from all these different research labs, and they would just all measure different aspects of the air inside. So all the different molecules that we're breathing, all the different particles that we make and that we breathe. And so we could get a pretty full picture as to what happens indoors and what that means to health.
What's interesting too is it was this little ranch house. I remember arriving at it, and first of all, it was hot as anything. It was in June, June 2018. I remember it was like it was approaching 100 degrees. I know it was. I got off the plane, got there, and it was like, oh, my Syracuse boy was toasted as soon as he got there. And I saw this little house. I'm like, this is it. And it seemed like there were more peripheral buildings and sheds with equipment than the actual footprint of the house.
Yeah, I mean, that was the running joke. It was kind of the cheapest house that Rich Corsi Bye. I mean, it was, but it's actually really important because that it represents a pretty large fraction of our housing stock, right? Cheap linoleum floors, cheap basic paint, nothing fancy in the kitchen. It was just your basic home. And it just didn't have, I mean, we didn't want to put our instruments inside the house for the most part because a lot of them produce a huge amount of heat and they're really noisy, but they also produce a lot of chemicals. And so we didn't want our instruments to change the house itself. We didn't want to change the energy balance. We didn't want to change the air quality. So what we did was brought in a whole pile of portable trailers and put them all around the back of the house. And then we took like tubing, whether it was copper pipes or Teflon tubing, depending on what we were trying to measure. We would send that from in those trailers out of the house. We would send those straight into the house, and then we would be able to measure what was going on inside. And in different rooms and different places.
What was crazy to me, and I've been an IAQ consultant for 30 plus years, and I'm used to going around with portable field equipment, handheld equipment, and this was like, to me, was for IAQ field work on steroids. I've never seen anything like this. I walked in, there was like, oh my goodness. I mean, this is like, I'm used to my little $5,000 laser particle counter. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, we had like it was really the top instruments from the outdoor atmospheric chemistry community that we were able to bring in. So this is a research community that's been thinking about air quality and climate and everything from ozone up in the stratosphere and the ozone hole down to urban smog. And these instruments that we've been developing for the outdoor air community over decades have been, are just absolutely top of the line research grade equipment from chemistry labs all around the country. And so being able to bring them all and actually take them to the indoor environment where we're about 2 orders of magnitude more more expensive equipment than is normally brought into the indoor air. And
that's a point to make here. This is a unique study in that you actually took it to a level that's not normally done for IAQ research.
Exactly. And it's not to say that every IAQ study should suddenly have these $500,000 mass spectrometers, but what it allows us to do is actually understand what we're seeing, and that can tell us a lot more information about sort of the fundamental processes inside a house. And then we can use that to think about, well, what does the $500, the $5,000 sensor, what does that mean, and what does that tell us? So it was a really fun experiment. I mean, it was really, no research study, no scientist had done this before, anything even like it. So that was really fun.
You gleaned a lot of valuable information there. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the comparisons to maybe consumer grade analytic equipment that may be on the market versus stuff that us as field professionals use, which like you're going from the hundreds of dollars to the thousands of dollars to the approaching millions of dollars pieces of hardware, and the differences that the different pictures that those things might tell you, and maybe the replicatability
right
with some of the lesser price stuff, but we'll get into that in a bit. But what just for the audience, what really prompted me to try to get this show scheduled on this week is you did a test dinner. You simulated, as part of your research, a Thanksgiving dinner, which I think ironically we're coming up on Thanksgiving week. So, yes. and you had mentioned this back at the IAQ and Energy Conference last month, is, boy, that would be interesting. It's like, well, here we are. Aside from the fact that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and I'm not trying to make light of that, and that really you probably shouldn't be having a big Thanksgiving dinner and exposing your grandma and everybody to COVID. I think that's really irresponsible, but that's for you to make your choice, I guess. But aside from the possible exposure to, this viral agent, there's other things that happen at Thanksgiving dinner that you should be aware of.
Yeah. So there's a total silver lining to people paring down their Thanksgiving meal, and that's that you're not going to be doing as much damage to your indoor air quality. And so we'll take what we can in 2020, and I think that is at least one small silver lining. but Thanksgiving was a totally fascinating experiment as a scientist and a totally delicious experiment as an individual. But what we did was we made the full Thanksgiving for 15 people, large turkey, the whole 9 yards on all the different sides, and we used the oven, we used the stove top, we it was quite an impressive array of food, all the pies, all the mashed potatoes, the sweet potatoes, the roasted Brussels sprouts, you name it, it was there. And that was amazing. As a chemist, we saw levels of compounds in the air that we had never seen before. And we've flown our instruments through wildfire plumes, and so okay, so there are more particles in the smoke when you pass through a massive wildfire plume. But once you start looking at the levels that we had in Thanksgiving in the indoor air, it was an incredible experiment. I mean, it was, for hours we would see really elevated levels of particles, which we know are dangerous to human health. But we would also see just this huge array of organic molecules. And those are, I mean, that intuitively, because that's what smells so good when you cook. That all that roasting food, those are that roasting process, that's all chemical reactions that you're doing right there. It's a whole pile of organic chemistry, and then it all goes into the air and you smell it. So there's just this huge amount of stuff that you're breathing in.
I guess my question is that necessarily bad? And I'm a vegetarian, so I got to say, I like the smell of the roasting turkey, but I will not eat the roasting turkey. But so I'm totally guilty here. So I am the guy in the kitchen cooking Thanksgiving dinner, usually making somebody else carve the turkey, but making all the other side dishes, gazillion vegetables to make me happy. And you're making me concerned that maybe all these great odors I'm smelling have a negative effect.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. It's curious. We don't really know all, like there's just so many different molecules out there. And so many different gases. We don't know whether a lot of them are bad for you. Those just haven't, there are a lot that haven't been studied. And my inclination is that the vast majority of them are not dangerous to your health. And I mean, one example is if you cut open a lemon, for a squeeze of lemon on a dish, you smell that lemon scent. But what you are releasing is just this huge amount of a molecule called limonene. It's a monoterpene, for any chemistry nerds out there, 10 carbons and 16 hydrogens all arranged. It's a beautiful molecule for a chemist, but it doesn't really do anything in terms of human health until it's at extraordinarily high levels, and ones that you're not going to achieve in your kitchen for very long. So those sorts of VOCs, I'm never really going to be concerned about. They're there, you breathe them in, and that's fine. But there are other ones that I certainly do have concerns about. And I will say, I think some of them actually do come from roasting the turkey itself. So you have a lot of protein in that turkey, and that protein breaks down as you cook. And then we get this release of these organic nitrogen compounds. And some of them are these compounds we call isocyanates. And so we see some of those compounds. Does that mean that people should stop cooking turkeys? Not necessarily. It is a short-term burst for a few hours of being exposed to some pretty high levels of compounds. But we don't really, we don't know a lot about what a short-term exposure, even at those very high levels, is going to do. But I certainly have taken the lesson of ventilate and then ventilate some more, because we don't know a lot about some of these molecules, but that doesn't mean that some of them aren't bad for you. Some of them certainly are. So I think the best thing that you can do is try and reduce your exposure.
Well, which raises another question. I mean, I think the typical home design, at least in the United States, does not really provide a lot of outside makeup air. We really don't. It's like, and even if and then there's this false sense of ventilation by people that have the recirculating hoods, which I have family members that have that and go, well, turn the fan on. I go, you realize that's stupid, right? It just blows it in your face. Well, it goes through a filter. I go, it's going through a metal grid. It's like, don't even waste your energy running this stupid thing.
Yeah. But I always tell people that, I have these really fancy, expensive mass spectrometers. You have a really cheap one, and it's called your nose, right?
Right.
You know when you have a lot of emissions. And so I guess one of the lessons I took away from our Thanksgiving experiment is that not all of those emissions are benign. Most of them are going to be just fine for you, but a few of them are molecules we know are dangerous. And so at that point, trust your sense of smell. If you can smell it, then it's probably there at a level that you should be thinking about ventilating. And so what would you do if you burned a piece of toast? You would probably crack open a window and maybe another window and think about a cross breeze. And maybe you turn on the fan in your bathroom and open that door so you have a cross breeze. Those are all good things that you can do. And so I would trust my sense of smell.
Well,
From
I
that
know like
perspective.
Lawrence Berkeley Labs, released that study years back. It was about 6, 7 years now. With the kitchen cooking and and they did follow up stuff on the capture efficiency of ventilation hoods that actually don't recirculate and actually go
Yeah.
outside. And I was amazed at how ineffective many of the consumer ventilation hoods really are capturing what's coming off of the range area, especially with gas appliances.
Yeah, initially I was shocked, but then I moved into a new house and we have a gas stove and it's got supposedly a pretty good hood. But if when I turn on the gas stove, you can smell, like, just for a moment, right? You can smell that gas, or you can smell what you're cooking. And so, my husband's sitting in the living room and he's like, "Ooh, dinner smells really good." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've had my hood on the whole time. You can still smell that. This is not very efficient," right? And so that. And
Yeah,
it was still a little mind-blowing to me that we could put all this effort into ventilation in the kitchen, and those hoods just don't, most of them just don't work that well.
or they
So
capture the rear burners, not the front burners,
yeah.
and because I was under this false impression, right? I have an old Gen Air in my kitchen, which is a downdraft, and it's a massive fan. It's like a
Oh
500 CFM fan. It's so loud, I hate the sound of it, but it's like, and I see steam coming out of the spaghetti pot going down. I'm like, yeah, this is great, and in fact, it's not that great.
yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, it's just nothing. I mean, I think what we forget is just the massive amount of stuff that is coming out when we cook. And I think that's one of the things we saw in home chem, was just this volume. I mean, it's like having a small bonfire in your kitchen every single time you cook. And I don't care how good your hood is over your kitchen, most of them just aren't going to capture that little miniature bonfire you have going on.
Yeah,
And
you're not in a lab hood. I mean, you're really not in the
yeah,
contained, and you still have a hood over the top where there's the ability for things to
yeah,
plume out. Yeah.
yeah.
So there's you I forget now, at home chem, did you have both electric ranges and gas ranges, or
We did. We
okay.
had, like, the main stove was a gas stove, but we also had an electric cooktop so that we could do a comparison. And what we found, I mean, there you get less stuff coming out of an electric range, so you don't have the nitrogen oxides and you don't have as many of like the small ultrafine particles. But past that, most of the particles and most of the pollution that you're introducing into the indoor environment is because you're cooking. It's when you put that oil in the pan and then you just get this huge emission of oil containing particles, and then you add something to that pan and then the chemistry starts to run, so you get these chemical
Hmm.
reactions. And I keep on joking that it's like a bonfire in your kitchen. The thing that's amazing is, from a chemistry perspective, a good chunk of what's coming out is exactly the same as what you get from a wildfire or bonfire. It's what we chemists call biomass burning aerosol, and it looks just like that. So you
When I
have
was
the
growing up, it
oil
was like when my mom was cooking. It really was that way anyway. It was kind of a bonfire in the kitchen whenever she was in the
bonfire in the
kitchen.
kitchen. I know.
Hence, I
Sometimes
learned
when
how
I
to cook
cook,
at an early age.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. My mother tended to more boil stuff, so I learned to cook at an early age, but for different reasons. Um, yes,
but we digress.
yes.
But that's interesting. So, there wasn't an appreciable difference between gas and electric, other than the fact you had the combustion byproducts with gas, right?
Other than the combustion byproducts that one would expect from gas, yeah, no, they actually chemically looked quite similar. So yeah, we expected the nitrogen oxides from the gas stove, and you definitely get those, and a little bit more of the carbon dioxide, and some of those that, like the sooty particles. But aside from that, the majority of the emissions are driven from the food and from cooking itself, and so that is what we saw as the same.
So we've already like cited that, for this Thanksgiving dinner, your cooking practices will have an effect on it. But also, and again, you shouldn't really have big gatherings, but when somebody comes with their Axe body spray and and the other things that are, and right, you cleaned the house before your guests came. So,
Yep.
what did that cause?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I mean, cleaning is amazing. I find the chemistry is just incredible. And again, it kind of should make sense to you. If you clean with something, we'll just leave it at natural products. In general, those products actually, they really don't do a lot of chemistry, and that's a really good thing. If you can, I always say you clean with the simplest thing you can. If it's just water, great. If it's water and soap, fine. If it's some sort of natural product cleaner that you hopefully find one that works, that's great. But when you start bringing in the harsh oxidizers, so anything like bleach or hydrogen peroxide, then the chemistry can run, and that's where you start having problems. And so you might have cleaned beforehand, that's okay. But if you clean right after you've cooked, it turns out those harsh oxidizing cleaners, so things like bleach, and I think also stuff like hydrogen peroxide, that'll react with all the food debris that you've left on the floor unintentionally, because you had all this beautiful smelling food and it came out of the pan, and then it just moved and traveled and falls down on your floor, and then
And that's interesting because you're talking small particle fallout on the floor, not so much chunks of turkey like from A Christmas Story.
Okay. I mean, like both of them are happening, if we're being honest, right?
Right.
But the whole combination of that food debris is going to react with those cleaners, and then you get a whole bunch of nasty things that you really don't want to breathe. So that's a big caution, is when you clean up. What I've learned is that when you clean after you cook, clean with something benign. Try to get the majority of the stuff off the floor. And it's not stuff that you see necessarily. The floor can look pretty clean, but it's all just those little tiny particles, things you don't really see. They fall and accumulate on the floor. You want to avoid those reacting with your bleach or your peroxide or any of the harsh chemicals. But better yet, just don't use them. Try to use the most benign chemicals you can.
And I will say, speaking personally now, and this is something I have to attribute to my wife, who, IAQ people sometimes tend to do those stupidest things in their own world, right? It's just like the plumber with the leaky faucet. And, I never, I would be out dealing with situations, dealing with indoor environmental issues, and, and doing, taking a photo ionization detector, looking for TVOC and doing all that. In my own home, I never really considered some of the, the household cleaners. You go to your local grocery store or box store and you buy this stuff. And we cut all of that out about 5-6 years ago, to the extent that all we really clean with, and this was, she kind of came in, with the iron fist on it and just threw everything out. And I was like, no, how are you gonna keep it clean? So we really just use white vinegar, or water, or or maybe a little bit of essential oil if you want a little bit of a scent. But honestly, we haven't died. And admittedly, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm not a lot of salmonella on my kitchen counter because we're not chopping up a bunch of chicken. But you can, I believe, right? You can use those. Yeah. You clean pretty well, because a lot of the cleaners, I think have we not been led down a really weird mindset, especially in the United States, that we need all these products.
Yeah, and I think we've also been led down a mindset, and this is not based on any research, just my own viewpoint and experience.
Clearly,
it's that we've been led down a path to believe that if something smells harsh, right, you smell the bleach, then you think it is clean, and that's just not true. what you're breathing is now a whole pile of toxic chemicals, and you probably would have been better off in most cases not using that. Now, obviously, there are some places that you need to use something a lot harsher, and there are people with medical conditions where they need to use something harsher, and then there's a trade-off in risks, and that's fine. But for the majority of people, we don't need to do that. But we've just been trained to think that we need to. And yeah, soap and water.
Well, you
Something
mentioned
simple.
this in your presentation back, last month at the IQ and Energy. What is the smell of clean? Nothing.
No,
Clean. It shouldn't have a
exactly.
fragrance. It shouldn't be some pine scent or floral or right. That's not
Yeah.
clean.
The best way to smell clean is to not smell anything. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's so funny. We were involved with years back. I was involved with helping design a greenhouse back in 2009, and it was one of the first ones under the National Home Builders Green Building Program. It was actually the 6th gold standard house in the country, and it was the first in New York State. We tried to get their emerald, but we missed it because we did some bad things outside on the on the landscaping that just were unattainable. But what was interesting is it was at a parade of homes where there was multiple houses. So 9 builders built houses. We were the only one that did this, and all the other houses had this wicked off gassing. As you walk into new construction, all from the adhesives and the flooring and the paints, and we used like zero VOC paints, which I know are not really zero VOC. I know you're a chemist, so you can, but they're lower than
they are lower VOC.
They're
and I'm
lower.
all over that. Yeah.
And we used a lot of products where we were very conscious of what went in there as far as building materials and finishes and that sort of thing. Then we also had built-in ERV, HRV system. So there's a lot of ventilation and air turnover. And people marveled that they walked in the house going, we don't smell anything in here. It's like, yeah, exactly. New construction, and you don't smell adhesives and carpet and all this stuff because it's not happening.
Absolutely. And those adhesives carry some pretty toxic molecules. Like acrolein is my new nemesis in terms of a VOC that you really shouldn't be breathing. And that's in all of these adhesives, and they're dangerous. So yeah, I am 100% supportive of these movements to much more it's better for the planet, but it's also better for you. And it does, you really want to avoid things that smell like those chemical products. So
yeah, and back, just before we jump totally off the cleaner thing, using the least benign, or the most benign, I should say, the most benign product, right? I mean, it's water. Let's face it.
And most of the time that does an amazing job, right? It's like
it kind of does. A wet paper towel, or actually cleans the surface quite well.
Yeah, and then if you have something like you cut some raw chicken, well then you need to use something else. But soapy water actually, it degrades the outside of a lot of microbes. It does a really, really good job of cleaning things. And so yeah, there are definitely going to be cases where you want to go with something a bit harsher, but a lot of the time you don't need to. And so yeah, trying to
COVID-19 for that matter, COVID-19. Right?
Yeah, the SARS-CoV-2 virus falls apart when you put soap on it. It's kind of like an oil droplet.
Thank you for correcting me again. I'm talking about the disease as opposed to the organism. Okay, I know this, but sometimes you get jaded because everybody around you says COVID-19 and they don't talk about COVID.
I know. Sorry, chemistry.
No, thank you. Because
it's like I'm
as a professional, I should have it right. So that's I picked up on that and me is like, oh yeah. That's what happens when you have a doctor in the house.
Exactly.
So in your, I'm gonna take this personal now. So in your world, with you and your husband, right? I'm assuming that you live by the standards that you profess that you learned from your research.
Yeah, I really try, and in most cases we do. So my husband does have a medical condition, so he does need to use bleach a little bit more often, but we crack open the windows in the bathroom and turn on the fans. We have some pretty good fans that we got into our bathroom, and they pull the air out pretty quick. So we do our best from that perspective, but I don't use harsh cleaners anywhere else in the house. Past that, we really try to live by what we say. So I use my kitchen hood, and it exhausts outdoors, and we use the good filters in our HVAC system. I had to go and we bought a new house a few months ago, and so the first thing I did was going to the HVAC, and pull out these piddly little tiny filters, and I
Was the
went
ones you
and
can see through? Do you have fiberglass ones?
yeah, you pretty much,
There should be a rule that if you can look through the filter, it's probably not worth a
like I
damn.
think I could put my hand on the other side
Yeah,
and count how many fingers I had up, and I was like, this is
that's
not
good.
useful. And
No.
so I just took that and all the other ones that they'd left for us, and I tossed them in the bin, and I went and got the highest rated ones that I could for the rather aging HVAC that we have, but good high MERV filters, and that's so that was one of the first things I did, and then we just I look at all the products we bring into the house. I really watch, I question what chemicals do I need to bring into my house for anything, and can I use, and then I always choose the least toxic version that I can. We do fragrance free on everything, and just try and minimize any exposure that we have. Crack open the windows as much as possible. But we had wildfires here in Colorado.
Yeah, that's out of your control a little bit. What's happening on the
exterior?
Yeah.
So there.
Your makeup air is not really good air.
Yeah. No. So then we did a lot of recirculating air and had all the windows closed. And because if you cracked open the window, the whole house smelled like a campfire. It was ridiculous. And so then we got these little portable air purifiers that just have a HEPA. No UV light, no ionizers, nothing else, just a HEPA filter.
You really don't want a lightning storm in your house?
No, terrible idea. Absolutely not. Just a HEPA filter. So we have those every room in the house that we use. It's great.
So I live by that too. And I'll even do a plug for the product. I don't sell it, but I IQ Air units, the Health Pro Pluses, which are like kind of pricey, $1,000 air cleaners, and I have a couple in my house, and I've had one in my bedroom for 15 years running, and the only time it's been turned off is to switch some filters. But the reality is, like, I will say, I'm doing a testimonial on unsolicited, because the thing, I've run it for 15 years and it hasn't blown up. How many products can you run for 15 years where the motors still work? And I do take a laser, so I am jaded to that extent. I'll run in with a handheld laser counter, and the particle counts in my house are pretty damn low, considering we're not really the best housekeepers, and I got dogs running around.
Yeah. I haven't gone and brought my particle counters into my house yet. But we know that those we got the cheaper ones.
But still, HEPA still, if they're really HEPA, they're going to make a difference.
True HEPAs. And it makes such a difference that in the bedroom, my husband commented that I just stopped snoring. And I think it's because ever since we started running them, and I think it's because all the allergens just stopped being in the air that were getting me congested. And so, and you can see and you can smell that it improved things. And I mean, the difference when we had the wildfire smoke in the area from the day, there was one day where I can't remember what happened, but we didn't have them running. And that day, you turn them on and you could just start to smell and see that difference almost instantaneously. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, there's most, and you mentioned something, you're like existing air handlers that are in, residential. And we've been talking residential today because that's really what the topic is, Thanksgiving dinner. And,
yeah,
I'm not trying to get into the commercial discussions, but most residential equipment doesn't have they don't have the capacity with the mechanical systems to you can't put HEPA filters in. I mean, you can have HEPA bypass filters where they take a little air and, side chain it. But how effective is that really? I mean, it's effective to some extent, but it's not, I think you do better with portable units in the space than a side chain on the main.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can look up how good your air, like what's the best filter your air handling system your air system can handle. That's what you choose. And then add with HEPA filters. And, I mean, in terms of the pandemic, that's one of the best things you can do to minimize transmission, right?
Absolutely.
We want to move as much air because the virus is going into these aerosol particles, same types of particles that we're cooking.
And this is a revelation though, right? Because, initially everybody said it wasn't airborne, and we believe now, I mean, at least many cognizant authorities believe it's also airborne. Maybe that's not the primary vector, right? Because it's dose related.
I think one can argue about what the primary vector is, but what we all know is that a really important transmission vector is aerosols, and then the other one is droplets. And I think the difference between them is semantics, like it's vocabulary. What it really is small particles coming out of your mouth and your nose when you exhale, and those particles are carrying these SARS-CoV-2 viruses. So dealing with them, we just deal with them exactly the same way that we want to deal with your cooking aerosols and your burnt toast. I mean, the first thing you want to do is not burn your toast, right? So the first thing you do with someone with COVID is try to stop that source. So that's to wear a mask if you think someone might possibly have COVID, symptomatic or not. And that, so stop the source. And then if you have a source, filters. They're amazing. Move air through, try to ventilate, and then those portable air filters that you get for wildfire smoke or just good indoor air quality, they're going to work well.
I mean, there's certainly, I mean, there's a distinct difference, right, between what you're going to achieve with those droplets, because those droplets do fall out of the air fairly quick. So masks are fairly effective. So I have to bring up this graphic. Yeah. So, is it useful to wear a mask? I stole this from the internet. So it's got to be true. But right, if you walk around outside nude and somebody pees on you, you get wet. If you wear pants and they still pee on you, you're partially protected. The guy peeing also wears pants. He pees in his pants, and you don't get wet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's that's the absolutely. There's your
sometimes you have to make it simple. You have to make it simple sometimes.
Absolutely. No, totally. That's what it is, right? It's source control, right?
We were making that argument though back in March when you did the first show with us. Right out of the blocks, Joe and Corbett too. We were all saying, people were saying, "Oh, the masks don't work," because CDC had some conflicting information out. Because again, there was this juxtaposition of the terminology masks and respirators, and they were saying masks aren't effective like respirators for protecting the individual, which is absolutely true. They don't protect the individual.
I think the other piece that was happening right around then too is that we started having this huge shortage on PPE, right, on personal protective equipment. So there was this huge worry that individuals were going to run around and buy up all the surgical masks, and then there already weren't enough for hospitals.
Right.
But I think now one thing that we're really realizing is that a well-fit homemade mask is actually is again that source control. It's just capping off what would otherwise be a source for someone else. And now we're beginning to, the studies are also again showing that they're pretty good for stopping other particles from you breathing them.
Well, the larger particles certainly, and again, it's not, are they absolute? No, but it's like you're reducing the likelihood and the level of exposure, right? Because these viral particles, from everything that I've read, the viral particles, it's a dose response too.
Exactly.
So the more of it you get, the worse it is.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we're seeing these nurses and doctors who work in hospitals. A lot of them are getting really, really sick because they're exposed to much higher doses. Whereas we're looking at, normal people just walking around, you are exposed to lower doses. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get sick, though. I mean, everyone has their own response, but masks just reduce that dose hugely, and that's incredibly important. And they reduce them for you breathing them in, but they also reduce them from your exhale breath to everyone else. So it's just, these are the times we live in.
Well, here's a science question for you too, because one of the anti-mask arguments that I've seen repeatedly on the internet is, the elevated levels of carbon dioxide under your mask.
Yeah, so this is something that people don't understand. So let me explain this really simply.
I need you to refute this.
So CO2 is a gas. It's a really, really small molecule, right? So it weaves in and out of anything. It can get through the most complicated maze and mask that you create. And so CO2, any mask you make, if you can push air through that mask, the CO2 is going to get out. So CO2 is not going to accumulate inside a mask. Particles, the ones that carry SARS-CoV-2, they are much, much larger. So I'm just trying to think about the right way to put the numbers. So carbon dioxide is on the order of a few angstroms. So it's 10 to the minus 10 meters in size. So they're really tiny. The particles that we're talking about carrying SARS-CoV-2, they're like 1 to 10 microns. So it's 10 to the minus 6, 10 to the minus 5 meters. So we're talking 4 to 5 orders of magnitude bigger particles than CO2. So those big particles, they're too chubby. They're not going to get through the filters.
Okay.
They're attracted to the fabric. So they're like, there's some electrostatics, really cool physics and chemistry, but those particles are just going to collide with the filter. The CO2 just doesn't care. It just doesn't care about that mask. And so it's just gonna make it through any fabric, any filter you put. So CO2 is never gonna build up to these supposedly dangerous levels inside a mask.
It's going to be 20,000 parts per million in there, and the OSHA concern level is 5,000. It's like, yes, but if you take a CO2 meter and stick it by your mouth, you get the same reading without the mask. It's like it's coming out of your lungs.
It's coming out of your lungs. Just it's fine. And yeah, I find it's really unfortunate that people have just come up with this idea and it's just not grounded in scientific fact. And so CO2 is it's like the honey badger, right? Just doesn't care. Just gonna go in and out of a mask. It doesn't matter what you put.
It was funny too. So I had a friend, who's not in science, making the comment that wearing her mask, she could smell odors with it. So how effective can it be? And I'm like,
gases.
It's like apples and oranges. The gaseous. It's like it doesn't do anything. It's like, and honestly, if I put my P100 mask on with a HEPA filtration, I can smell the odors too.
Yeah.
It's like, but I'm stopping the particles.
I'm gonna say that's a really good thing. If you can cut open a lemon and you can smell that lemon scent through your mask, then that means air is just moving in and out. That's great. And if you can smell that, that means that CO2 that's getting out of your mask. It's just the particles are a whole different ballgame. They work differently from the gases. So.
Which brings us to an area that we probably should at least cursorily cover, since you're a research scientist, is science denial. Doesn't it drive you crazy? Yeah. And I know you have to, you represent a university, so you only go so far. But I mean, it really drives me crazy too, because I view myself as a scientist, as a field scientist that does diagnostics work. And I can't stand the fact you can't, if you could demonstrably show me some facts, I'll listen to you. But if just, spouting nonsense or denying.
Yeah. What bothers me the most is just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true, right? I know I don't want there to be a pandemic either. I would like to be able to go and see my friends and fly and go spend Thanksgiving with my family. I would love to. But just because I don't want there to be a pandemic doesn't mean that there isn't a pandemic. And I think that's just been I think what's been the most frustrating is that we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the science behind things like the COVID pandemic, behind climate change. There's a lot of science and a lot of information out there. And trust me, I am not paid very much money for the work that I do. I can make a lot more money doing something differently. No one's making money on science. But we've learned just so much about this, and people just don't want to believe it. But it's worse than not wanting to believe the science. I think there's now this movement to actively be anti-science. And that disturbs me, because where's the line on that? If you, if you start being anti-science, then what are we going to talk about in terms of medical treatments? That's all science. And then if you don't want to believe in masks, then are you going to not believe in chemotherapy or vaccines?
Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson hit that really well. Just because you don't believe in science doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It doesn't go away. It's like you don't believe in gravity, but when you step off that cliff, you fall.
You're still gonna fall. I know. And there's just these reality is gonna come and hit you, and that's just so. And the thing that's so unfortunate is that there's so much beautiful and wonderful things that happen because of science. The colors change in the fall. That's chemical reactions occurring in a leaf. That's beautiful. And then there's useful stuff. You want you want science to be able to work because
Well,
you want to be able to drive a car and you want to be able to,
science evolves too. That's the
trust.
other thing. Science is not a static thing. Knowledge is
No.
not static, right? It's like, well, you said this, and now, and now they're saying this. It's like, yeah, it's called actually progressing and getting new information and then readjusting. Things always
Yeah.
adjust because it's
And
called learning.
and I think I think the COVID pandemic has been a great example of that, because initially people thought, like scientists thought, that this was going to be transferred by surface, on surfaces, right, through fomites. So then we had this, initially everything was about cleaning surfaces. And then we learned from the evidence showed us that it's airborne. And so then you change the recommendations. And I mean, I think the fact that people are like, oh, well, people have changed their mind. I'm like, that's because we got new information and we changed our perspective. And I mean,
Data.
everyone has that. And I mean, if we all had one viewpoint, I mean, goodness, at least if I didn't change my mind about things, then my diet would be stuck as a 5-year-old's and be pretty uninteresting. And
Those chicken fingers were mighty good, weren't they?
I know, they were delicious, but and such things as avocados and mushrooms were terrible. So I think things change, but we have to move with the evidence. And that's, I mean, that's the glorious part of being a scientist, is that you get new information and you change your perspective about it. And that's useful.
But to hone in on something that you just mentioned on the COVID thing, the original thought, right, were the fomites and that the high touch surfaces and all that. And what alarms me is still clients that I speak with, on the consulting side in school districts, are still really concerned about surface cleaning. And not saying it shouldn't be, but it's like, you understand that if you clean the desks with a strong sanitizer, and little Johnny comes in with, and starts spewing the virus particles out of his lungs over to Susie next to it, the cleanliness of the desktop isn't really the issue here.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And we've been using the term hygiene theater a lot.
Clearly, it's going in and
of-
spraying the whole building and doing all that stuff. It's like, and I'm
This is a
I've been
terrible idea.
I'm in remediation, so I actually took exception to that right out of the blocks. And I hear all these companies making all this money. I go, that's nonsense. It's like
It's
going in and
ridiculous.
sanitizing buildings. As soon as you put the occupants are the transporter, they bring the virus in.
I had this interesting conversation with a company that had really developed after anthrax scares, and was contracted by the government to clean up various buildings after there had been anthrax exposure. And so they were like, well, we can just treat SARS-CoV-2 the same way. And I was like, no, because with anthrax, someone sent a letter, and so there's one source at one time. Whereas with SARS-CoV-2, it's every single person who walks in is actively continuously breathing out this contaminated aerosol, right? And so you would have to permanently spray these rooms and buildings, and that's dangerous. And I just find that, in dentist's office, they're now spraying with hypochlorous acid, which is bleach, and that's a terrible idea, and it's not going to protect anybody.
It's a terrible idea for the occupants. Yeah. It's really not at all. Well, I mean, maybe we could use like a car wash mindset where you come through and they spray you as you come through.
But that only works for that one moment.
No. Perhaps we could inject it. Perhaps we could inject it.
Well, that would really solve the problem. I feel like if we could.
I've gone as far as I should go now.
Yeah,
I've crossed the line.
I think we should.
This isn't going anywhere that's going to help half our audience. But regardless, it's fascinating. The fact that just back to the whole science to wrap up the science discussion, right? Is that you guys did some really amazing stuff at HomeChem, and there's a lot of information to be gleaned from that about our indoor environments, and we just scraped on it. I mean, in our little discussion here, you guys did so much more. So we do have to have future shows with you back on to discuss other aspects other than me just ranting politically.
Absolutely, we'll do a little bit more. But in the meantime, Thanksgiving next week.
Right. Give us some steps to make Thanksgiving better for indoor air quality. Let's and you can throw SARS stuff in there too if you want.
The raw food movement, boiling your turkey, these would all be great steps for your indoor air quality. But in all seriousness, I would ventilate. So crack open windows if you're cooking, always good. And think about cross breezes. Think about moving air out of your kitchen and preferably outside and bringing nice, clean, fresh air into the house. That's one. But I think other things you can think about are, how long are you cooking for? And if you can, instead of cooking over the course of 8 hours, you can do it over 4 hours. That's just less time to be exposed to particles and gases that are being emitted. That's one thing. You can really think about cleaning. And I would definitely, we have reasons. The chemistry shows that if you clean immediately after you cook, those two, the chemical products from the cleaners and then the emissions from your cooking, they react and they form little tiny particles. So I would say just relax after Thanksgiving. Don't jump up and try to clean your house. Wait a day and let the air clear out. That's something that I definitely have taken.
It generally takes me a day to sober up to clean the house anyway, so it's like that's
well,
that's
there
easy.
You go.
I can follow
I've given you an excuse. I'm
going to say Dr. Delphine Farmer recommended that we don't clean the kitchen, honey.
No, I never said never.
I didn't say never. Today.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
But I think those are some things. But I think this year is a special year, so try not to interact with too many other people, and if you have to, try and do it outdoors and in a well ventilated space. That's a big one.
That's a tough one for us in the cold weather environments. Certainly, outdoors. I guess you could always have that Thanksgiving. Well, I can't even the Thanksgiving bowl,
But you can crank up the temperature, the heat in your house, and you can open your windows and set a fan going. Right, and it's gonna work. It's gonna be the best thing you can do. But other than just trying to make it a smaller Thanksgiving, stay home and reduce your emissions from cooking, and then you'll breathe a whole lot better. So,
DoorDash.
There you go. I'm growing a fan of takeaway.
That's so crazy too. That's and I could get off on another tangent here. Is how many times we order food now that I never did in the past. But it's a different
I like
world.
it. But I've been thinking a lot about the trash that it generates with all of the portable temporary food containers. But
it's awful.
It's it's an interesting year. We're all learning to deal with it the best we can.
That's a good way to put it. So we're at time here now. So I wanted to also remind you guys, thanks again for watching us on the Healthy Indoors Show. Healthy Indoors Show is a production of Healthy Indoors Magazine. We are a monthly free digital online publication. We also have a website, healthyindoors.com. That's where pretty much all of our repository of wonderful information and pithy commentary resides. At healthyindoors.com, you can get a free subscription to the magazine. You can see all of our back issues. You can see articles, videos, various forms of reference, and it's a good place to go. We're going to end the season on this one, and we'll be back after the first of the year with season 5 for the Healthy Indoors Show. So that's it's been a fun ride. I really want you all to really be conscious, stay safe over this holiday season. Just like Delphine mentioned, it's going to be important. Take this seriously. Do what you can to minimize your risk and the risk to your loved ones and friends. Make sure that wear masks when you're in social contact, distance, limit your exposures, You hear it so many times. I know you're tired of hearing it, but it's important. It really is. And I want you all to stay safe and get through this holiday season and see you guys on the other side of this. So with that, really like to thank our special guest, Dr. Delphine Farmer. Great seeing you. I will see you at Colorado State University this time. Oh my goodness, that was awful. That was just going unscripted is dangerous. So with that, we bid you adieu. Have a great holiday season, and we'll see you soon on the Healthy Indoors Show. Thank you.